Hello everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to be going over 5 more very strong engineer builds. So with our very first build, we're going to be using Stubby as our primary weapon, and we're going to be using this with the EM Refire Booster. This is probably my favorite overclock for Stubby. It gets you more damage, more electric damage, as well as a faster rate of fire at the cost of more base spread, which is perfectly fine for me. The way that I usually build Stubby, at least when I'm using it, is like this. However, I do know that people like just going this straight 2 build, which is a really good option too. Increased electricity chance in tier 1, 4, and 5. The extra electricity damage on this does help. I've tried building this with just full damage, full rate of fire, and it can also work. I like going with the extra mag size in tier 2. However, a lot of people like the increased recoil reduction in tier 2. It does make it easier to hold on target. This one is your choice though. You could even go with the faster rate of fire if you want. That one's also pretty fun. And then going with increased ammo in tier 3. You don't really need the damage. The ammo is probably more useful for Stubby, at least with this particular overclock. Fairly straightforward. You're just going to be using this at close to medium range, picking off enemies. You kill things fairly fast. Regular enemies you kill quite quick. Bigger enemies a little bit slower. Stubby's not the best at that, which is why we have a secondary that will complement that well. For our secondary, we're going to be using the Shard Diffractor, and on the Shard Diffractor, we're going to be using Overdrive Booster. This one is an overclock that you don't actually need to activate, which is great because otherwise it doesn't take anything away from the weapon. Assuming you're just using it normally. The way that you activate this though is when you're firing the laser, hit your reload button, and then you will be using an even more powerful laser that deals more than double the damage, but it does consume twice the amount of ammo, and you cannot move when firing this. You can also not cancel it unless you use something like a pickaxe or a weapon switch, but if you do cancel it, you'll be losing out on all the ammo that you would have used throughout the beam. So you don't want to be canceling it too often unless you're in immediate danger and you really need to get out of that, because otherwise you will go through ammo really quick. The way that I build this is just straight for damage, so increased damage in tier 1, increased weak spot damage for tier 2, faster recharge time in tier 3, although you can pick either of these in tier 3, they're both really good, armor breaking in tier 4, and then the hydrogen rupturing in tier 5. This gets us even more damage, at least if things are being electrocuted, which is going to be very useful because Stubby can do that, as well as if we're playing solo, Bosco can also do this. If there's something big like an Oppressor or Praetorian or a Dreadnought, we can switch on the Overdrive Booster and deal really high damage to it. If there's anything else, Stubby will clear it up. And if we can mix these two together and have an even stronger potential laser at the end of this. We also then have something to take care of long-range enemies, so if there's Mactera at a very long distance or Spitters at a very long distance, we can use the Shard Diffractor for that, because Stubby might struggle at longer range, at least with the way that I build. This is a very fun build. I find it to be very flexible. It works well against basically everything. Our second build is also a fairly flexible build. For a primary weapon, we're going to be using the Warthog Auto Shotgun, and we are going to be using Cycle Overload on it, which is a super fun overclock and a very strong overclock as long as you can get in the range to fight stuff with it. It does kind of handicap your range. You're not going to be using this at very long range, at least not very effectively. The way that I like to build Cycle Overload is just like this. This is kind of my standard Warthog build. So increased rate of fire in both 1 and 5, extra ammo in tier 2 because otherwise you will run through shots with this. You could go with the pellets if you're taking this on like an elimination mission and you don't feel like you need the extra ammo. Otherwise I would recommend the extra ammo because Cycle Overload can eat through it pretty quick. Mag size in tier 3, but any of them are fine in tier 3, pick whichever one you like, and then extra damage in tier 4. This you just have a very high rate of fire automatic shotgun that does very high damage. However, it does have a lot of spread and it does have a lot of kick. So anything that's medium to long to very long range, you're not really going to be hitting, at least consistently, with Cycle Overload. You're going to want to use this up close and personal, get right up into the enemy's face, blast them with this. You do only need one shot most of the time to kill regular enemies, even slashers. I believe you can one-shot headshot, and I don't know if you can with guards, but it feels like you can do a very high amount of damage to them. Things like Praetorians just get right up next to their weak spot and hold this down until they're dead. Same goes with Oppressors or really anything. And then for a secondary, since we are lacking in range, I'm once again going to be taking the Shard Diffractor as our secondary, and we're going to be taking this with the Volatile Impact Reactor. This one gets you sticky flames, kind of, pseudo-sticky flames on the Shard Diffractor at the cost of our effect radius and also our charge capacity. So the way that I build this is just going with more ammo, that way I can use it more often. So extra ammo in tier 1, weak spot damage in tier 2, but both these are fine in tier 2. I've used them both. I like the weak spot damage a little bit more, but either one is fine. Faster charge speed in tier 3. Usually don't need the extra ammo even though you're losing out on this, and I just find the charge speed to be a little bit more handy in a lot of the situations where I am using this because I'm likely using it at very long range. Fire in tier 4, that way we can light things on fire even quicker with this. And then biomass converter in tier 5, that way we can potentially refund some of our ammo. We're just going to be using this at long range and then just sweeping the beam across any sort of enemies that are at longer ranges or even at medium ranges. That way we can potentially light them on fire, and the fire will do a lot of the damage, either killing them or wounding them, so that when they do get close, our cycle overload can take care of them very quick. Moving on from that to our third loadout, we have the Loki as our primary weapon with Seeker rounds. Seeker rounds essentially gets you wall hacks. Your bullets can just fly right through walls, and they also kind of teleport, so it's very difficult to actually hit allies with them. The way that I have been building Seeker rounds recently has been like this. This is a little bit of an odd setup, but I do kind of like it. We're going with extra ammo in tier 1, but ammo and damage are both really good. They work really well with this because it's basically impossible to miss, at least with this build. Increased range in tier 2, but tier 2 is completely your choice. Pick whichever one of these you like the most. Tier 3, I'm taking the smart locks. This is just so that we don't waste extra rounds, because sometimes the Loki can do that, and especially with this one, we don't have the most amount of bullets. Faster lock-ons in tier 4, I just find this more useful than having more lock-ons in general. And then the fear mod in tier 5, although I've used the damage and the electricity generator mod, all of them work pretty well. For a secondary, we're going to be taking the RJ250 compound for the grenade launcher. This ultimately nerfs your damage, however you get a lot more grenades from this. And it also allows you to rocket jump, which is very important for this build because Seeker rounds does fire a bit slow. So getting out of danger is pretty important, and RJ250 can allow us to do that, as well as give us some level of crowd control. It's not fantastic against bigger enemies, but it does work fairly well against small groups of either swarmers or against regular grunts. The way that I build RJ250 is like this, going with extra ammo in tier 1 and 2. This is just so that I can use it more often, so I get even more rockets out of this. Tier 3, I go with fire. This has a double purpose. Fire is really good for clearing up grunts in general and clearing up swarmers. You do nerf your damage with this, which actually is kind of beneficial to you in this sense, because if you use it to stop your fall, you likely won't take as much damage. Same with if you're using this as an escape, you also won't take as much damage. Increased AoE in tier 4. You could also go with the stun here. The stun I find to be really useful on RJ250. And then go into Spiky Grenade in tier 5. The way that I usually use this build is use the Loki at medium to long range to try to hit enemies as much as possible. And then to use RJ250 either to throw into crowds to kind of soften them up, or to use just as a mobility tool to either get away from bad situations or get to better spots so that I can then switch back to Seeker rounds and deal damage there. For our fourth build, we're once again going to go back with Stubby as our primary weapon, and this time we're going to be using the Clean Overclock Super Slim rounds. This gives us 5 more magazine size, as well as cuts down on our base spread by 20%, so Stubby suddenly becomes fairly efficient at longer ranges. It's kind of surprising that just cutting down on that little amount of spread makes Stubby as accurate as it can actually be. The way that I build this is a little bit different. You could go once again with all the 2 builds and just have an electricity Stubby. This one I decided to go with something a little bit different and just kind of use it as a spraying Stubby build. So going to the extra ammo in tier 1, extra rate of fire in tier 2, extra ammo in tier 3, weak spot damage in tier 4, and larger magazine size in tier 5. This gets us a 55 round magazine, which takes a long time to run out, as well as we're doing decent damage, and we have a really high rate of fire, so we can be sustaining this rate of fire fairly well. It's great for picking off smaller enemies. For a secondary, we're going to be taking the breech cutter, and this is going to be our heavy hitting weapon, so we're going to be using this towards any large enemies. We're going to be taking this with return to sender, which is a very interesting overclock. It's much more of a magic trick overclock and a very fun one. It can still be fairly strong against large enemies once you get used to it though. The way that you use this is you fire it out, and so long as you're holding down the trigger, the line will keep going. Once you release the trigger, the line will come back, assuming that the duration has not already exceeded how long the line goes. So you can potentially get double the amount of damage out of each shot, but you do lose out on overall ammo with this. So overall, you could switch this out for like lightweight cases. I think that would be a better option, or plasma current. I think those would also be better options if you want something that's high damaging. The way that I usually build this is like this. This is my standard breech cutter build, going with larger mag size, so we go from 3 to 6 rounds, going with more ammo to make up for the lack of ammo that we have, going with the quick deploy. This is just so that we can shoot it out faster, and I usually take born ready with the breech cutter. I don't really ever reload it. Stun in tier 4, armor breaking is also really good, pick whichever of these you'd like, and then plasma trail in tier 5. I find this one to be very useful because you can get even more damage per second out of this, and it does kind of let you have some lingering damage that will clear up small things like jellyfish and swarmers. And then for our 5th and final build, we're going to be taking the Warthog auto shotgun once again as our primary weapon. This time we're going to be taking magnetic pelt alignment. This one increases the weak spot damage that you get, as well as decreases your base spread by 50%. However, it does slow down your rate of fire. So you have a more medium to long range shotgun than you normally would, but it's a little bit less useful at very close range because of the rate of fire nerf. Now the way that I build this is actually to make up for the rate of fire nerf. and I find this to be okay. It's still not as fun as like Cycle Overload, but it is pretty strong. The way that I build is exactly the same, pretty much for all the same reasons. Again, you could take extra pellets in tier 2. That does work. I wouldn't really recommend taking the choke in tier 2 though. That sounds like it would be a good idea, and you could get some extra range out of this, but it really doesn't seem to impact it all that much. Just having the magnetic pellet alignments reduce spread, I find is good enough most of the time. So now you can use your shotgun out to medium or longer ranges. You can still use that close range, but if you start getting a lot more enemies coming, it is going to be difficult to clear them up quickly. Once again, that's okay because our secondary is kind of making up for our weakness. We're going to be taking Pack Rat on the grenade launcher. You could take really any overclock with this though. Pack Rat is a very basic overclock. This just gets you 2 more rounds with the grenade launcher overall, and we're taking extra ammo in tier 1 and 2, although you could take extra AoE or extra damage in tier 1 or 2, or both. If you find that you don't need those extra shots, fire in tier 3, although any of them are fine in tier 3. Probably not take armor breaking. Armor breaking's bugged at the moment for the grenade launcher, but fire or increased velocity are both good. Increased AoE in tier 4, again, stun is really good in tier 4, and then direct damage in tier 5. Usually the way that I use this is grenade launcher at medium range towards crowds, sometimes larger enemies, mostly crowds though. Clear them up, soften them up, and then use the magnetic pellet alignment for anything that's big. So these are 5 more strong engineer builds. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Tell me your thoughts on the builds down below, or if you have any other strong engineer builds. There's a lot of very strong engineer builds. And special thanks to the supporters of this channel. Thank you for all your support. I really do appreciate it. If you guys like to see more of my build guides on Deep Rock, be sure to click over here on this playlist right now. That should take you to a full list of them. You guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.